And we are now live.
This is Senate Appropriations Committee, and what we're going to be doing this afternoon is some additional discussion on an interim funding relief or a fast track bill. The House Appropriations passed out their version yesterday afternoon, and so it is going to be voted on. It's on notice, so we wouldn't get it until Friday. And so this gives us a chance to do some work, and also gives our policy committees some extra time, but it also gives us some extra time because what might be happening in Congress, and we're going to have Peter Welch in on Thursday, will give us an idea as to the extent to which that infusion of federal dollars into the state would influence any of the one-time list. For example, there's a lot of money that's, for towns or downtowns or whatever, and yet if towns are going to get 300 million, which is one of the first estimates, then maybe we should be looking at how those funds are coming in. And the same is true, I believe, that there's money for homeowners, because the money that came in the bill in December was limited to renters. And so there seems to be funding and recognition that we have homeowners who have serious economic situations as well. And so that that will give us the opportunity to better understand what is happening on the federal side and how it will influence ultimately decisions that we make, or it may mean that the general fund can be used for other long-term investments that the state would like. So we have Senator Campion coming in, I believe tomorrow, Chrissy, is that right, tomorrow?
That is correct.
Because he has some proposals in terms of the money. There is another, in the last bill, there's what is called ESSER 2, and there was about 12 million that flows to the Agency of Education. We spent 3.5 of it for our Burlington High School fit up, but the remainder is still there to be appropriated. And so that committee has recommendations about what they feel would be appropriate uses. And at the caucus today, I guess everyone would have been there except Rich. It is around how we get summer programs stood up. Really concerned about literacy and the fact that our kids are really behind, even under the best of circumstances. But we know with COVID and being out of school and the interruption of instruction, that particularly children from many families are going to be even further behind. And part of what they've been looking at is how to train teachers to better instruct and more effective teaching techniques around reading. So literacy will be there. The ghost students, which is of concern if you read the newspaper, kids that are just, they know who they are, but they're talking about a need to go out and connect with them, maybe as part of a team approach to find out exactly the kinds of supports and the issues that have to be addressed as part of education. So those are some of the just highlights of what we're going to hear from education. The bill, as it came over from as it's coming over from the House, does not have any recommended appropriation for these educational services. But the feeling is that we really need to get these commitments out. Parents need to know if there are going to be summer programs, there needs to be lead time, if you're going to get staffing and the logistics of them. So that's part of why we're hearing that. Brownfields, yes,
Chair,
Bill, yes.
Before we move on from education, I was thinking the other day of compensatory education for kids with special needs. So during the pandemic, their IEPs have been interrupted, and federal law says that you have to compensate them. You have to have a plan for remediating what they didn't get. And so those are additional costs that are going to start coming due, as we go forward, maybe before September, but certainly if we're back in person in September, districts around the state are going to have additional special ed costs. So,
Well, don't forget they have 128 million that's flowed out directly to the schools.
yep.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we can hear from Senator Campion and or Dan French if somebody has that piece covered. Because if
Okay.
districts haven't budgeted for it, they're going to come to us for it.
Well, what they were hoping to do is, and that's why we were having some discussion, and that is with the money that's flowing out to our schools is provide, even though the legislature doesn't have authority over it, certainly there can be policy statements about the use of the funds and offer some guidance or some recommendations. And that was part of the discussion around how we can take the concerns that we're hearing in the legislature and those needs and put them out in the form of some kind of communication or guidance to our schools in terms of how this money provides the opportunity to address those requirements, in this case, those requirements, but other things as well. So that's something I believe the education committees are going to be working on, is that that kind of communication out to schools, not more like guidelines or how these funds can be utilized to address identified needs based on testimony that's been provided.
Mhm.
Bobby, you have your hand up.
Yeah. I think, I don't know what the answer is to this dilemma, but we've had preschool in place for quite some time. We have preschool in place, almost every school has a preschool. Then we do kindergarten. And now we get them to the third grade, which is only 3 years in, the third year in, and they're reading at 50% proficiency. Somebody's got to talk to French, and he's got to answer for that. I mean, it's ridiculous that we're getting all these children that are falling through the cracks when they've been to school since they were 2 years old.
Well, I think that that's been a subject of a lot of testimony in education, and the question becomes one, I think, of how to, and in some ways it's a longer term discussion, and that is what we have for training around this critical subject area. And I don't know how well our teacher training, the pedagogy around teacher education addresses reading techniques. I do know that they've gone through different methodologies, the same as math, and some. So the goal is to have, for example, the Stern Center has got some really good programs, but I think both for teaching reading, but also for students who might have reading disabilities like dyslexia. So some of it is giving the teachers the skills so that they have the ability to effectively teach these students. So I agree. It's it's very troubling to the education folks to have, particularly when we've been told, if you make this investment, then kids will be prepared to come to school ready to learn. And then what would be the metric of ready to learn? So I don't know, Phil, you've been involved in this for a long time.
And then there's also the, disparity in childcare centers and the amount of credentials the people teaching there have. So, it's a range, and we have a STARS program, and some people have 4 stars and some people don't. There's minimum requirements for having a licensed instructor on site, but that's one licensed instructor on site, and then you may have many who aren't licensed. I think it's a system-wide problem, but I think Bobby's right. There should be a plan in place.
Wow.
including. Yeah, go ahead, Wes.
I just, you have to stop right there, Phil. We
Yep.
have for the licensed kids, that's what we have. But we only have enough placements in licensed facilities for 48 or 9% of the kids. So over half of our kids are not in anything like you describe for assistance.
No, I described a range.
No, you described a range for the licensed providers we have, but we have over 50% of the kids being taken care of, only 20% of them by their parents. So we, over a third of all of our kids are someplace that we aren't licensed or anything.
But a lot of those, in looking at that study, were actually with other family members. And
Right.
many of them, interestingly enough, were at no cost to the parents. So it was, it's kind of an interesting, and that was a report I think you were pushing for, Rich.
That's exactly right.
And how families are meeting this need. So if you're lucky enough to have family, then that helps both socially and financially, and hopefully, depending on what the home life is like, it can help academically. But anyway, I don't want to get into a prolonged discussion about literacy.
I don't want to. But I would also point out, Annette, Phil, that the problem is we're going to have lost licensed providers. So when we get through this, you're probably going to have a world where 55% of the kids are in nothing licensed. You described the licensed world, but not.
But Rich, I'm not defending the system.
No, I
as it
didn't
currently
say you
stands.
were, but
I'm pointing out the way it is and saying I agree with Bobby. There should be a plan and resources to accompany it.
Definitely.
Sounds like
Because
that's
don't
part of
forget,
what this
before
bill
the
is doing.
childcare, we've already got kindergarten and grades 1, 2, and 3, and those are licensed and they are credentialed educators. So it's not a negative reflection on just or of childcare. It's a larger issue, and it does require an organized response, and that's what we're going to hear from education tomorrow. So I think no one's.
The other part of that, which would be very interesting, is to see where these children came from. Did they go to preschool? Did they go to daycare? Did they go to preschool? And are they failing, or are they ones that lived at home and lived with family or stayed with family and had no previous? So we would know if we're getting a bang for our buck or not. Well,
I don't know how much of that data is available. I know that so much of this ties back to the skill of the teacher, and teaching reading does come with a certain skill, and then so it's one of our fundamental attributes we need for adults. You have to be able to, you have to have a certain degree of literacy. So it's a very troubling situation. And the one thing I will say, based on what I heard from data back when Rebecca Holcomb was secretary, is that because we hear it a lot, and that is, well, we have a lot of kids that are on free and reduced hot lunch. But their data would show that there's some teachers that can achieve better educational outcomes with kids from poorer families than other teachers are getting from families that have higher incomes. So I think we also need to be very careful that we not consign kids who are from families that are of modest means, that somehow that's a reason they can't learn, or they get categorized, because those kids are the ones that really need the educational resources more than anyone. So we need to make sure that we equip the teachers with the skills, and that's why there's money there. But we can spend more time on it, but that's one of the things. So we know that more money's coming out. We're hearing from Commerce. The House has the 10 million that we've wandered around here between the budget adjustment to whatever, 10 million for business grants. I talked to Mary Hooper yesterday afternoon, and she was saying, well, they were just told that they couldn't use the CRF, because I had mentioned I really want to do business grants out of CRF using general fund for this purpose. I don't want to set that precedent. But then they got a communication from ACCD that said, no, you couldn't use CRF money. Well, today we got another communication saying, well, maybe we were premature in making that statement, and it would be possible to use CRF. So our Economic Development Committee, and Becca, you were there maybe in the morning, really concerned about if we're putting money out to businesses, that we use this as an opportunity and to get as much guidance as we can, say from Tom Cavett, that we are strategic in how they're being, what businesses are being helped. So we have the 10 million once again back, and our economic development are struggling with what that might look like. They also want to see about moving forward or reactivating the mortgage relief or mortgage assistance program that, but I understand, and we'll know by Thursday a bit more, how much money is going to be in that federal bill, because the one we had in December only provided assistance to renters. And homeowners were not included, but this a bill I understand would provide assistance to that group of Vermonters. So maybe we can get the program started up, and maybe by the time we start it up, we'll have this other federal money coming in. Then we have the small request for St. Joseph's that came in to finish up the groups. Originally, we were thinking maybe the budget big bill, because it was picking it up as of July 1st, but Senator Sears had felt that it was better to make that statement that the money will be there and there's no interruption, and that since we intend to do it, he would recommend that we include, I think it was 127,000, or it was.
I think it's only 27,000.
Oh, I mean, 20. It was a very modest amount.
Yeah.
So, and then the higher, the slaughter capacity, Senator Starr has already talked to us about moving some of that money out. The House bill just appropriated all the money immediately for working lands grants. We wanted to say, well, if we move it out, we might, out of that amount, designate a certain amount specifically for slaughterhouses. The broadband, I don't know. I got an email from the chair of finance asking about whether they were limited to the 3.2 of the CRF money that did not get spent by December 20th, or could they be more expansive? And my request was make recommendations on both. If you want to make recommendations, the House bill includes 2.2. So there's $1 million left. And we are going to have to get some recommendations from Finance Committee, either to affirm the 2.2 that the House has put in and for what those purposes, and or to expand on it. And then
what was that for, Jane, the 2.2?
Out of the 3.2 that was remaining as unspent of the allocated money to the Public Service Department for broadband, there was 3.2 million left unexpended and unobligated. And so the House bill that we're going to be getting at the end of the week appropriates 2.2 million out of the 3.2. leaves
Yep.
$1 million left. So I don't know what I haven't had a chance to look. Maybe Stephanie can inform us what the 2.2 is for, but we need to hear from our finance committee. Do they want to do more than the 2.2? Do they want to do it in a different way? And so that's one of the areas where we probably are going to need more information. And then we'd had some, we had a communication we had Gus Seeligan last week, and Gus was basically saying he wanted the 20 million they were envisioning would be available for projects that would qualify for tax credits. And in the end, they could parlay the 20 million into a total of 80 million investment in housing.
Yeah.
The House committee was anxious to do something for the more immediate term, and that got into the 73 apartments that he talked about and the St. Albans facility, but that was $1 for $1. They didn't qualify for the tax credits and the leveraging. So I think the House was thinking, and actually I think we've all because we've talked about it, or I've talked about it with the chair, was that maybe moving forward with those projects that we could get apartments and get people in permanent housing would be good to move forward, but try to do everything we could to keep the full $20 million available to be leveraged into the 80. So
When you can get 4 to 1, that's the way to go. You can get $4 for $1.
Yeah, and so that's why Gus was supporting keeping the 20 million there, but then it comes up to us, and out of the money that we have, would we say, look, housing is such an important priority. We want to take off that 212 million, the money necessary to move those two projects ahead.
Yep.
Okay.
That's good.
So then we had, and I believe I sent this to everybody, we had a communication from the Vermont Food Bank about the, it was the contract that USDA, I think it was USDA had for the meals, and the contractor went out of state. It was the Abbey Group here in Vermont, and there was a problem with the distribution, and so the food bank stepped in, and so they were asking for money for January and February when the system wasn't working. Maybe that's something we can ask Peter Welch about, because I know that was a source of concern for him. So they put in money for that.
I think they're coming back to a Vermont supplier, aren't they, as well?
I don't know. I imagine, I haven't heard that for sure, but I do know that as long as it was with the Abbey Group, everybody felt it worked well. And then when it went to this out-of-state contractor, the distribution turned out to be problematic in certain areas of the state. And so they put in a one-time 1.3 million to pick up several months of the of this interim response because of the flawed federal contract. And then, but I think you've seen this list. Chrissy sent it out to everybody, but we might as well go through it. And that they have the allocation of the 15 million for the schools air quality, which we've already, I think we had agreed we wanted to move forward with Efficiency Vermont. I did get a request to have some language added from the Efficiency Vermont people, and Stephanie's exploring that. So I think that was an area of concern.
What was the language about, Jane?
It had to do with direct staff cost and recognizing that a program like this does require staffing and direct cost and indirect expenditure. So we'll take a look at that language once we get it.
Okay.
It's similar to
They
what,
They already get 9%, I think.
well, I think it was to deal with, to make it explicit, Philip. Once
To-
Stephanie gets.
Clarity, yeah.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was more clarity than changing what has occurred. That's all.
Okay.
Working lands, they did the 3 million in grants. We're talking about doing a combo maybe. And then they moved out the forest and parks and the VOREC and the state lands. So I think we were all pretty much in agreement. Those were had a seasonality benefit to moving the money out and making it available. And then there's a one-time check for Reach Up families. And we did one before. It was about 1.2 million. It was a supplemental payment to those families. And then there's a kind of a combination of activities within mental health, which we probably need to take a look at. There's something called housing supports, which is a big one, 4 million. And I don't know exactly what the testimony was on that. And the other is mental health workforce training and wellness. There may be so we'll have to take a look at what is time sensitive about that, because there's the larger discussion around, are there ways that we can put out money to help bolster our mental health, our SSAs and DAs, either with some capital or, as we talked about, with some kind of one-time bonuses or whatever, if we can't find money to do a base increase. And so we need to get more understanding of what is there and from the House. And so I've sent this on to Ginny Lyons, all the committee chairs, to take a look and tell us what they think about this. And then there's some other additional funding for Vermont Refugee Resettlement Association of Africans Living in Vermont grants. Once again, we know that health disparities are a really significant challenge with certain Vermonters, and how we provide translation services, how we connect with them, how we address getting information out from the right people that provide confidence is always something that we can do better. So there's some money there. And that's kind of where we are. So I would say that if there's anything, probably the slaughterhouses, doing more with the education. And there's one other education related, and which I think we've talked about a bit, and that is workforce related. And last year we did put some CRF money in, and about 1,000 Vermonters took advantage. I know I talked about this, of either certificate programs or coursework through the state college system. And I know that Brian Campion is going to propose doing something again to continue the CCV course provision that was funded by a philanthropic organization last year. But also there's a request that was not accepted by House Appropriations, but it was endorsed by House Healthcare. And it's kind of a model program, and I'm going to forward it out, and it would be training for 40 LPNs specifically within our long-term care, because we know nursing home care, out of the hierarchy of where people want to go into nursing, nursing homes have a very hard time recruiting. And in this environment, they've also been disproportionately impacted by COVID risk and deaths. So there's a proposal there to set up a program that would train 40 LPNs. And Rich, you probably
Love it.
Well, I was going to say this ties into that rural task force, the healthcare.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I was talking with Laura Pelosi today, and she said that VSAC had been incredibly agile in getting the money out and helping people with programs. So this is a way of addressing a shortage by building capacity. So many of our projects just, as I say, throw out incentives, but they don't deal with the underlying problem that we've got to expand the capacity of our programs to produce more nurses. So this is a project that I will send out, but if it would be a collaborative with our nursing home industry, it would be with the Vermont State College, with VTC, and I believe NVU, to train 40 LPNs. Now, 40 LPNs to inject into a starved system when, and the nursing homes were originally interested or willing to help with the cost, but what's happening with the nursing shortage, they're having to hire traveling nurses at $125 an hour.
Yeah.
And
the VNAs are having trouble too getting help, and I think they would help. I think I know ours up in Newport would help on something like this.
Well, in this case, LPNs are the nursing homes particularly rely on LPNs. Nursing home as a nursing setting is one where that's very attractive to that group of nurses, segment of nurses. Right. So I told Laura that I would inform the committee of the request. As I said, the House Healthcare Committee supported it, but it also, they had other things that went forward with it. In this case, this is something that could get set up and moved out, and we could start producing more nurses.
What time frame could we get going by? Fall or summer? Or
I think so. I'll send it out and people can take a look at it. But it's very much where there's an acute shortage. It helps deal with the fundamental problem, and that is we've got to start expanding capacity. It's a good model of collaboration, and it's attacking where one of the most significant shortages of nurses exist, because nursing home care and environment, they are not everybody wants to do that level of nursing or that kind of geriatric nursing. So
it would help the schools out too. It would help the colleges by filling some classrooms, and it would be just good common sense to do this.
And then the other is brownfields and the extent to which we want to move out at least the first year of that brownfields and get some of that work going. Seems like that has a tremendous economic. So it seems like we would be talking about a couple things that aren't in the House bill. One is if we move more out for brownfields, if we want to do more in education and workforce development and addressing our nursing shortage, and then doing something more to refine business grants, and then also allocating a specific amount of money for slaughterhouse expansion.
Yep.
So have I missed anything?
You've got a heck of a plan there.
Oh, I do.
We've covered everybody, I think. No, I'm sure there's some gaps.
Let me say that I think based on what we're getting for information from the congressional delegation, that if Biden's bill passes, there is going to be a significant amount of money that will flow. As I've heard, as I said, to towns, 300 million, or municipalities.
For just Vermont?
Uh-huh.
And then there's, in addition to that, Jane, there's also the money to counties, which we don't really have a county structure, so it's not clear exactly how that will be disseminated.
Yeah, we do.
Well.
We have a little bit in the form of sheriffs, law enforcement, and maybe a waste. And then, of course, schools are municipalities, and
The
waste
CUDs.
districts, waste districts and CUDs. So
Yep.
we have other structures, although we don't have the organized and the presence of county government like many states. California's, but of course their counties are bigger than all of
Florida,
Vermont, New York.
Florida runs
Yeah,
all
sure.
county governments.
So I think that'll be very informative in terms of the decisions that we make. So we're going to have the advantage of having a bit more information about how that will fit. But if we can free up general fund, then that could help us with maybe more IT, more broadband. I mean, just think about, and the other thing is the extent to which we can do some pre-funding. OPEB, they struggled with, after we had our testimony, I was struggling with it. They've reserved $20 million as a statement of intent to move something on that. But they did not appropriate, they just reserved it. I've said before, whenever we put in that healthcare for retired teachers, it never was, it never really was funded. And at first it was funded out of the pension fund, Teachers Retirement Pension Fund. But then when it grew, then we came in and Beth came up with a proposal, and then we did a $20 million loan and to got it set up, but it's falling de facto to the general fund. And I think it raises the larger discussion, just like we did with retirement, as to whether that healthcare benefit for current employees, how that gets funded as an education related expenditure. Because in some ways it's defaulting to the general fund, but not necessarily because it was ever an explicit decision. It's more just because that's happening. So that's going to be part of a larger discussion around where that responsibility for that education related cost for our current teachers should be paid. And Bobby had a couple more things. He's got the 250 for the ecosystems, you thought, and soil health. You thought that could be moved out as well.
Yeah, and he said he could get to work right in May, maybe even tail into April.
Who is he?
Ryan Patch, he's the guy that's in charge of that over at the Ag Agency. And, otherwise he'd have to wait until, into late July or August. And so, and we might be, if you wanted to do it, we might be able to split that, part in the early bill and part in the later bill. But for that small amount, I should think we'd probably want to get rid of it.
That would be kind of my inclination. Yeah, and it would carry forward. Stephanie, is there anything that I need to cover that you have on your inventory?
I'm going to check. Oops, this is out.
So I'm going to just close out. We're going to add the money for the slaughterhouse for St. Joseph's. We're going to add out of the working lands. We're going to take the slaughter capacity, and I think you had 500,000. Bobby, was your recommended first slug.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that should get them started and going until the second money gets ready.
Then we're going to have to come in terms of the federal bill is just going to influence so much of that. And that is, the extent to which we'll even need to front a mortgage relief program as a bridge to federal, but we can find out more on that. If we do some funding to help homeowners, then we can always have our usual language around if money is made available, then we will swap it out, so to speak. Then I think one of the other big issues, because some of this ties into it, and that is the federal bill and how much is going to be there that's healthcare related, because so much of what we want to do in terms of outreach, and there's been so much attention to the fact that that we have health disparities and the need to get healthcare out to those communities and the outreach. And I'm thinking that maybe that's another area that it seems like there would be significant financial support to underwrite those activities. So other than that, I guess we could vote the bill out today.
Get ahead of the House that way. Could we amend their bill in the House, do you think?
I don't know. So we have some more work to do and we have some more input from committees, but it seems like we've got a fairly robust list. And Stephanie, one of the questions that I had was whether with that rental assistance, whether we could actually purchase buy-in of the community solar projects.
So I've asked Riley Allen and Doug Farnham, and they haven't responded to me yet.
Okay.
If they've got any more guidance, because we were still waiting for guidance around the utility assistance piece within that 200 million.
Okay.
But the grant acceptance put about 12.2 or 12.3 million over in public service.
Yeah. But if we could,
yeah,
we have 53 million left that we have not allocated. So
right.
I don't think that there'd be any shortage. And I don't know, some people felt that the amount, the 110 for rental assistance might be pretty ambitious as well. So actually, yeah, so that's, so I think that if it's a permissible expenditure, then it seems that we would use that funding source to do those community solar buy-ins.
Yeah, the white paper from public service on the community isn't, the way it reads isn't exclusive to renters. So there may be lower income homeowners that would not be covered under the rental assistance.
Yeah, but that's
piece.
okay. That would still cover a significant number, or with this new bill,
homeowner assistance piece.
the homeowner could do that. I did get an email from a municipality saying that they would, if they could get assistance with solar, it would help with the municipal costs, such as streetlights or the fire station, with those costs. So that it seems like maybe if they got 300 million, those are the kinds of long-term investments that communities could think about. Anything else that we have on the weatherization? I don't know whether there's a desire to move anything out earlier, because I don't know whether there's capacity within the system right now. Rich, do you have a comment?
We talked about that in committee. There really isn't anything that we felt needed to be moved out. We talked about the training of the people to do the work, but we still have questions because there's training money going to VHFA. There's training money in Efficiency Vermont. There's training so we want to make sure that that's all coordinated. And what we've heard is most of these areas, if they know the money is coming in July, they'll get started on it ahead of time. And it really doesn't matter whether the money comes in April or the money comes in July, as long as they've got some idea that there is commitment behind getting them the money.
Okay.
So we probably discussed this for half an hour in natural resources this morning, and there wasn't anything that we felt needed to move before the regular budget.
Sure. Well, and don't forget, there's probably going to be another train leaving the station with all this federal money coming in. Yep. So I think it's just like last year, we're going to be nimble, and as resources become available, then we'll be doing multiple bills.
Well, and frankly, if some federal money came that way, it might free up some of that that 35 million, the 20 that is mostly weatherization in the 10 for solar, it might free up some of that, or we might be able to add to.
Right, right. Or we can do something more. Don't forget, we've got a couple of things. We've got our state college issue.
Yes,
Um,
I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so, and then we've got the other problem, of course, is that the childcare is funded by money from Keno, Senator Sears.
Yes,
And there's some people that apparently don't like that revenue
and sports
source.
wagering,
Just pass it.
just pass it.
Senator Baruth.
Before we move off that quick mention of state colleges, I just wanted to flag for us to think about the transformation money. If you remember on their graphic, it said it could be done in a lump sum this year or over a period of 5 years.
Mhm.
And if we have, significant extra federal funds that we can free up other money with, it might be a good idea to do that.
Pre-fund. I know,
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But the other part is, though, they need actually more base funding.
Yeah,
No, I realize that. I'm talking about
Yeah,
doing both, basically.
yeah, yeah. No, the transformation is probably the easiest to it's so measurable and you can pre-fund. So I think that's the kind of thing we've got to keep on our list, is the extent to which we can help this one-time address some of these outer year challenges. Other thoughts? It's 2:30. We can't be done already.
Good,
Well-
I got a meeting at 3.
we can put the shovel away or we can keep digging the hole. Maybe we'll find some gold.
So I was asking Chrissy how we're doing on our FY22 budget, and we still have some more testimony that'll come in after town meeting day. But we're plugging away pretty. The budget's pretty
There's one piece in the, oh,
pretty
sorry.
level, huh?
There's one piece in the bill, the mini bill on the hookup for taxes that we didn't talk about. House Ways and Means suggested that the 2020 hookup to
Oh,
the
yes,
federal
okay.
tax.
Yeah, I think I'll have to ask finance for their view on that. It's to deal with the problem around the treatment of the federal decision around the PPP, which is that it's not taxable, but so it's giving businesses a double benefit of allowing them to claim expenditures that in fact got reimbursed, got paid for by the PPP, and therefore that federal tax decision has implications for Vermont tax revenues. But because would be retroactive and people are already filing their forms now, House Ways and Means concluded that, and I know that this is something that Senator Sorokin has brought up, that this is revenues that the state isn't going to get, and that's absolutely true. But in order to get them, you'd have to change your tax rules, you'd have to decouple, and you'd have to go back retroactive for people that may have filed. So the Ways and Means Committee basically concluded that we should just not attempt to deal with it for 2020, but make it clear what the policies will be in 2021. So Stephanie, do you want to add to that at all?
No, I mean, the way it's drafted in the bill is we link up to the federal system every year. So it's just changing 2019 to 2020. That's not clear that's going to be the case in 2021.
Yeah.
But the 2020 link up retroactive to the beginning of January 2021 to cover tax year 2020 is in this bill.
Yeah. And that was done simply because of the, you can imagine it has to be resolved. I know tax preparers are saying, how's Vermont going to treat this? And so they've got to get some clarity in terms of, do we follow kind of the federal rules and then deal with it next for 2021 tax year. All right, Senator Sears, anything else that you might have on
No.
your committee that we need
No, I
to?
tried to get the judiciary to send something over. They've been very non-committal, they're like, well, yeah, it's the county courthouses, but I don't know what they're doing.
Well, then, but it's not as though this is kind of the end of anything. So there's
No.
more time. Okay. And Senator Westman, we've taught into natural resources, so we're all set there.
Yep.
Ag is taken care of. Ed's coming in. Economic development, I've been in constant communication with Senator Sorokin. We need to get something from finance relative to the broadband.
Yeah, that's a big issue. Do you think we could get some of that money to put into the CUDs, is it, to help some federal money there? Or?
Well, actually, that was one of the, I think one of the policy proposals that's being under consideration in House. So the 2.2 is sort of a quick response to what needs to go out now, but there's the remaining money, which is about 20 million, I guess, for broadband. And
there is.
Yeah, in the governor's proposed one-time general fund. And that it gets into a larger discussion, and that is, if we're using general fund, then what will be the requirements that go with the funding? And that gets into, Senator McDonald has had his, statement about, should it be 100? Other people are saying maybe not. I've got other people that say Starlink is the answer, and other people say no, it's not, because it doesn't have the broadband you need for large files and for many people working at home professionally. Should we direct the money to support the CUDs, which are a creation of the state? All of that policy work really needs to be done by the House Technology Committee and our Finance Committee. But those are those are some of the things that have to be considered, and that is which we couldn't do with the CRF money because of the federal constraints. But if we're spending state dollars, then what do we as a state want to put for the conditions on the expenditure of those dollars? Will they be directed? Will they be used to support the CUDs? Will they only be used for projects that deliver a level of service at X level? Those are some of the considerations. And then there's the bill about exempting the poles and wires from taxes. And Rich, is that something Natural Resources has been taking up, or is that all finance?
That's finance.
Okay.
So does that mean that if they hook up to the utility companies on poles and wires, that they would become property tax exempt?
Yeah.
There's a bill that would do that, and Washington Electric is pushing for that. And many years ago, Washington Electric actually brought a lawsuit around the tax, taxing of poles and wires. And I think the state prevailed, but so it's been an issue, but it also has revenue implications. So I don't know.
It's a big loss to the Ed Fund.
It would be a big loss to the Ed Fund, but if you're going to,
Well, I mean,
What do you pay now, Richie,
I can't, I just put that on my list to figure out what our charge would be. But, in many of these companies, it's joint. I think we only own like 55% of the poles, and we've been trying to buy the poles from Consolidated.
Yeah, they're not all owned by you. It's a combination of
It's a
ownership.
combination, and it's been a problem for us.
And I think that was part of why they wanted that pole inventory, is because there's really not a complete record of who owns, which company owns which poles.
Well, we actually, in Vermont Electric's case, we know what we own now. The survey that's been done, and most of the companies have been doing this through grants from public service. What we don't know is what poles are ready and what poles aren't to run fiber to.
So I guess that would be another way of subsidizing the development and the rollout of broadband.
Absolutely.
The question is, if we have a lot of federal money, is it better to do it more directly than it is to do it through a tax exemption?
Yep.
To me, that's a policy.
I think in Vermont Electric's case, 60% of our system would be ready for some sort of fiber to be run to it, but about 40% of the system isn't ready. The poles and what you need to do to get prepared isn't ready.
Okay. Well, obviously the revenue implications are fairly significant. And
one would be forever.
Yeah.
It would be forever. And I think also it could be some redistribution of cost if the revenues are lost to the education fund and only certain utilities pick this up, then conceivably property owners and parts of the state that don't have a utility providing this service, it's going to, the property tax or some revenue will have to make up the lost revenues,
right,
that from the utilities that aren't, if we did this tax exemption. So I suppose there might be some geographic equity issues that get raised here as well. I guess I'm happy to leave it up to finance to take the testimony on that.
I'm sure it won't be uncontroversial.
You're right.
No, I know. I know. And it seems like it's Washington Electric that is really wanting to take the lead on this. Although Christine Hallquist, when she was there for Vermont Electric, was could see the role of the utility of using utility infrastructure.
Well, it would. Well, I think it
makes perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense, and it's going to have to be done. I will say, there are more poles and wires out in rural Vermont than there is in the larger towns, so it would benefit the rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, they're right there, and they go the last mile. So all we have to do is tack on the wire and go.
Right.
On a positive note, the Senate Judiciary Committee held hearings on Comcast data charges for overuse of data, which they've just incorporated. And they actually have, partly because of what we did in a letter from the Attorney General, they postponed any charges until next January.
Additional charges.
Additional
That's
charges.
good.
And that was done in judiciary. Is that because of a legal charge or?
I just figured we could do it. It was in the
Oh.
books.
Oh, okay.
We held a meeting and we sent a letter to Senator Cummings
Mm-hmm.
and the governor. But we were worried about scams on this, where people would call up and say, you've been using too much, bandwidth. And
Talk about surprise billing, the people in Texas. I can't imagine
Oh my
getting a
God.
bill for
yeah,
3 days, $17,000.
oh my God.
Yeah, that was a scam job.
I know. And how many people would have 17,000 necessarily on an account that
Well, I
would
saw
support a
one woman that
withdrawal?
was paying 98 cents a day generally.
But
3
isn't,
cents to 98 cents in a variable plan. And she
Isn't
gets
it
a bill for
like-
1,400 for one day.
isn't it kind of like the adjustable rate mortgage though?
Yeah,
Like those people have been getting cheaper bills for years because of that.
Yeah.
And so I feel for them now, but you know, they made a deal where they were accepting lower rates than people who had a fixed plan. So
well, I think part of the problem is Texas chose, I think it's the only state without a regulated utility for electric.
Yeah. And they're not part of a
And they
regional.
don't like being regulated down in Texas. So this is, I guess, what
I
happened.
wonder if they're gonna go totally green now in Texas, or do you think they may have learned a little lesson?
They're not going totally green.
Well, what do you mean?
No,
That's
they
what
blame it on
caused
the,
them all
they
their
blame it on the
grief.
windmills.
Blamed it on the wind towers. The other
Well,
thing was
that's-
those people who got the bills, they had automatic withdrawals from like their check.
Right.
Company just whoosh.
I know, but Alice, what I was saying is how many people keep 17,000 on their checking account to have it
Right,
debited?
right.
it can't be,
Don't-
that's it.
Did you
Don't
say
worry.
$17 or 7?
Senator Campion, that's a mere bag of
Bobby
shells to
Starr
him.
keeps more than that in his petty account.
17
Uh,
grand?
Mhm.
I'd better have.
Well,
You don't
I
need to
might have it,
worry.
But I wouldn't necessarily keep it in my checking account.
Well, no, but it's close where.
He
if
can
you
get a hold
need
of it.
You can get a phone call with trucks any time of the day or night that could cost you 50 grand.
Well, it's quite a
What are
surprise.
you
and-
hauling there, Bobby? They would cost you 50 grand.
You send one, have one of them go off the road and just call the cleanup and the record guy.
Oh,
So
the
Jane,
the-
don't you worry. Ted Cruz is demanding regulation this morning, so don't worry. He's on it. That's what he was doing in Cancun. He was cutting a deal with regulators to come back. You know, he's on it. So don't you worry.
Oh, all right. I wasn't losing a lot of sleep, but now I'll sleep even better. The other thing that I just wanted to clarify for people, and that was there's been some discussion about whether we should adjourn, and then come back. Last year when we did that, it was because we were so challenged by our state revenue forecast. That's why we could not build a budget, because we didn't know what we had for base revenues to support the budget. This year, what we're dealing with is not the issue around what do our revenue forecasts look like for 2022. It's how it's the additional federal money, which I think, based on our experience, we've set up a pretty good structure of moving millions of dollars through either the conditions on which we place a grant, if it has to come through the joint fiscal, and the way in which we send out information to all the committee chairs and move it through, because we moved a lot of CRF money out, as you know, over the summer and out into the fall. But the comment was made about, well, because there's so many unknowns. But last year, the driving unknown was that our economists didn't feel that they could give us a forecast with any degree of reliability for us to build an entire year's budget back in the spring. So I just want to remind people why we felt we wanted to do a quarter budget and then come back once we had firmer revenues, which we did in August, which it was really around the state. So that was brought up, and I just wanted to refresh people's memory that what was the big unknown was our the forecast that would be done by our state economists.
Yeah, I asked Becca about that at caucus, and the only thing I'm wondering is they're already talking about doing a third bill down there in DC. And I want to make sure, I would like to make sure that we legislators, if that happens, and there is money that's awarded to us, that we have some input in that, not just the governor. And then, because you guys on joint fiscal, you can either accept or reject, right? You can't fool with it, can you?
Oh, well, we have influenced a lot, Bobby,
Oh,
because
okay.
if it has to come through and be accepted as a grant, then we have, like we did with the last 200 million that came in for rental assistance, we accepted the grant with the conditions. So it's true, we can't appropriate. And so we had to work with the administration around what they proposed. And then we would say, or sometimes I went to them and said, would you propose this? And they said, yeah, we agree. And they would propose it because we can't appropriate. There are other times when they proposed and we said, no, you've got to come back. So I'm just saying it was sometimes it's a bit rocky, but in the end we moved. I think the only area where there was a lot of concern, and that was the lack of being strategic with business grants.
Yeah.
In a way,
it's certainly clear that, what is there, 6 of you on joint fiscal or so? You can 10, you can move that money so much quicker than fooling around with all of us. But if we adjourn and go home, the only way we can get back to Montpelier is if the governor calls us, I believe. Whereas if we just adjourn and go home for X number of months or whatever it is, we're still in the ball game.
Well,
you could.
That's partly true. We can also we quite frequently set up a system whereby the legislature can figure out a way to come back. We do that around vetoes and all of that sort of stuff. So that might be something that we want to think about, language on how we would structure something.
But that would be the big bill that we would anticipate that.
Yeah, that.
That might be something that Becca wants to think about.
But I would suspect that by the 1st of May, we would have a pretty good sense of what action, because it is so time sensitive for Congress to act, that we would have the advantage of knowing pretty much what's out there.
Yeah. That's all the signs we're getting from our federal partners is it's going to happen pretty quickly. And of course, Peter Welch is going to be here Thursday, so he can give us some more insight, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So with that, and we have chairs at, we have a chairs meeting at 4. So I'm going to.
Maybe Becca could call it at 3 and we could get done by 4.
That would be nice. I have a board meeting at 5 to 6:30.
I bet the other afternoon chairs would have my hide, but I appreciate the thought, Mommy.
Oh, there was no malice in that question.
Well, let's see. We've got 1, 2, 3 chairs here.
We'll have a fast track chairs meeting. We'll have a mini chairs.
Yeah, 4 chairs. Okay, so I'm going to suggest then, unless there's anything else, Chrissy or Stephanie, that you want us to take up.
Nothing from me.
Nothing from you. Stephanie? Maybe Stephanie stepped away. I think we've gone through the list. We've kind of reviewed what we have out still coming in and what the House, and I sent a copy, Chrissy sent a copy of the House bill, so you can take a look at it in greater detail. And then I've sent the House bill out to all the committee chairs so they can take a look and give their thoughts. And I'm going to suggest then that we can take a break before some of us have our next meeting at 4. And then I have another meeting at 5.